Amazing Couples by Victor Yap and Doris Mock. Chapter 12. Change Comes from Within. 1 Kings chapter 14. As Bill was approaching midlife, physically he was a mess. Not only was he going bald, but years of office work had given him a large pot belly. The last straw came when he asked a woman co-worker out on a date, and she all but laughed at him. That does it, he decided. I'm going to start a whole new regimen. He began attending aerobics classes. He started working out with weights. He changed his diet, and he got an expensive hair transplant. In 6 months, he was a different man. Again, he asked his female co-worker out, and this time she accepted. There he was, all dressed up for the date, looking better than he ever had. He stood poised to ring the woman's doorbell when a bolt of lightning struck him and knocked him off his feet. As he lay there dying, he turned his eyes toward the heavens and said, "Why, God, why now? After all I've been through, how could you do this to me?" From up above there came a voice, "Sorry, I didn't recognize you." Jeroboam, the first king of the northern kingdom Israel, had extraordinary help rising to the top. Initially he was a warrior, a capable worker in charge of Joseph's house, 1 Kings 11:28, the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, Joshua 17:17. Because of Solomon's idolatry, Ahijah the prophet announced to Jeroboam that God would tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give him 10 tribes, 1 Kings 11:31. Meeting the prophet did not stop him from making 2 golden calves to cause Israel to sin, 1 Kings 12:26-33. Jeroboam turned idolatrous, ironically, when there was peace in the land, 1 Kings 12:21-24. From there on, Jeroboam was the most idolatrous king in Israel's history, the worst of the lot because of his powerful influence. Why is idolatry odious to God? Why are people ungrateful despite God's grace? How does God want us to respond when we sin? What lurks ahead for all unrepentant sinners? First, confess and do not conceal sin. 1 Kings 14:1-5. At that time Abijah, son of Jeroboam, became ill, and Jeroboam said to his wife, "Go, disguise yourself, so you won't be recognized as the wife of Jeroboam. Then go to Shiloh. Ahijah the prophet is there, the one who told me I would be a king over this people. Take 10 loaves of bread with you, some cakes and a jar of honey, and go to him. He will tell you what will happen to the boy." So Jeroboam's wife did what he said and went to Ahijah's house in Shiloh. Now Ahijah could not see. His sight was gone because of his age. But the Lord had told Ahijah, "Jeroboam's wife is coming to ask you about her son, for he is ill, and you ought to give her such and such an answer. When she arrives, she will pretend to be someone else." A lady is walking down the street to work, and she sees a parrot in a pet store. The parrot says to her, "Hey lady, you are really ugly." Well, the lady is furious, and she storms past the store to her work. On the way home, she saw the same parrot in the window, and the parrot said to her, "Hey lady, you are really ugly." Well, she was incredibly ticked off now. The next day she saw the same parrot, and the parrot said to her, "Hey lady, you are really ugly." The lady was so ticked that she went into the store and said that she would sue the store and kill the bird. The store manager said, "That's not good." He promised the parrot wouldn't say it again. When the lady walked past the store after work, the parrot said to her, "Hey lady." She paused and said, "Yes," and the bird said, "You know." There is no hiding in sin. Note it was Jeroboam's and not his wife's idea to disguise herself, using an imperative, "go" or "arise" to direct her. He was so sure the deception would work, adding, "So you won't be recognized as the wife of Jeroboam." The man was either infallible or ignorant. His plan was, of course, incomplete and ill-conceived, calling Ahijah a prophet, verse 3, but nevertheless thinking he could fool him or God. The word disguise, verse 2, is also translated as change, Malachi 3, verse 6. Jeroboam added yourself, or disguise yourself, which was laughable. One can only disguise one's behavior with clothes but not the true self. Here was a man who was smart enough to know that Ahijah was a prophet, but still was stupid enough to pull off a trick. Jeroboam's wife did her best to pretend, verse 5, to be another person, but there was no pretense before the Lord, verse 6. This chapter is about disguise, verse 2, and pretense, verses 5 and 6. In truth, Jeroboam was never really repentant of his sins. When his son was sick and dying, he did not get on his knees or turn from his sins, but sent his wife as substitute in camouflage, in costume, cloak, and cover to ask of the prophet if his son would recover. He was also more interested in having his wife change herself than in his changing himself. He coveted the cure, but not the change. He sought for diagnosis, but not deliverance. As it is said, change comes from within. Worse, Jeroboam was shameless by preying on an old prophet who could not see. Probably Jeroboam knew Ahijah could not see because of old age, even though we are not told if he did. We are not sure if Jeroboam did his homework. If he did, his wife would not need to pretend. Either way, he did not want to take the risk. The irony is that the prophet did not lose his sense of hearing, verse 6, or his relationship with God. Ahijah could not see, but he was not blind to Jeroboam's sins. The prophet could hear and smell his sins a mile away. He could see there was no change in the king. The current episode fitted and represented the portrait of Jeroboam. Surprisingly, he never asked the prophet to heal his son. He only asked what would happen. Jeroboam was only concerned about the future, not about his son's welfare. In fact, he never asked for healing. He wanted the facts, not the findings, so his plan was out of curiosity, not out of conviction that the Lord would heal. Second, confront and do not condone sin. 1 Kings chapter 14, 6-11. So when Ahijah heard the sound of her footsteps at the door, he said, "Come in, wife of Jeroboam. Why this pretense? I have been sent to you with bad news. Go, tell Jeroboam that this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I raised you up from among the people and made you a leader over my people Israel. I tore the kingdom away from the house of David and gave it to you. But you have not been like my servant David, who kept my commands and followed me with all his heart, doing only what was right in my eyes. You have done more evil than all who lived before you. You have made for yourself other gods, idols made of metal. You have provoked me to anger and thrust me behind your back. Because of this, I am going to bring disaster on the house of Jeroboam. I will cut off from Jeroboam every last male in Israel, slave or free. I will burn up the house of Jeroboam as one burns dung, until it is all gone. Dogs will eat those belonging to Jeroboam who die in the city, and the birds of the air will feed on those who die in the country. The Lord has spoken." A new convert declared his determination to give all that he had for the Master. He said, "Pastor, if I had 50 pigs, I'd give you 25 of them to the Lord." "That's very nice," said the pastor. "If you had 30, would you give 15 to the Lord?" "Of course I would," said the new Christian. "If you had 10, would you give 5 of them?" asked the pastor again. "You know I would," he answered. Then the pastor said, "If you had 2, would you give 1 to the Lord?" "Now, pastor, don't ask me that. You know I only have 2 pigs." Jeroboam was given all the advantage to make a difference as king, but he tossed it away without much thought or hesitation. Jeroboam was as ungrateful as it got. He was the first ruler who did not descend from David's line. His rise was amazing, astonishing, and alarming. In many ways, he had a privileged, prestigious, and powerful standing in Jewish history. God's declaration, "I raised you up," or "I lifted you up," or "I exalted thee" in King James Version, is a new but transitional clause in the history of the North and the South. The phrase is used exclusively on the new Northern Kingdom kings, specifically the first two, Israel's first king Jeroboam and the next king Baasha, 1 Kings 16:2. He called himself king, verse 2, but what did God call him? A leader over Israel, verse 7. Of 104 references to Jeroboam in Kings and Chronicles, only 3 refer to him as King Jeroboam, 1 Kings 15:1, 2 Chronicles 13:1. But for a chronological point of reference, similarly, the northern kings are most identified as King of Israel, seldom King so and so. Out of more than 2,000 references to kings, only about 10 of them refer to a northern king by name. For example, King Jeroboam or Jeroboam, King of Israel, 1 Kings 15:32, 2 Kings 8:16, 25, 14 verse 1, 23, 15 verse 29, 16:5, and 2 Chronicles 16:1. While none lived up to David's commitment to God, 2 Kings 14:8, none lived down to Jeroboam's contempt for God. Jeroboam had a long list of sin and shame. Jeroboam was one of 2 kings, along with another dynastic founder, Ahab's father Omri, 1 Kings 16:25, who had done more evil than all who lived before him, 14:9. Jeroboam was the only person unfavorably credited in the Bible with making other gods, verse 9. True, Solomon went after other gods, 1 Kings 11:10, but Jeroboam made other gods. Jeroboam was the first of 5 kings who provoked God to anger, 1 Kings 14:9. Amazingly, provoking the Lord to anger is exclusive to the northern kingdom and her kings such as Baasha and son, 1 Kings 16:2 and 13, Omri and his son Ahab, 16:26 and 33, until their exile, to be taken up by southern kings such as Manasseh, 2 Kings 21:6, after Israel's fall. He was the first king to introduce idols made of metals or molten images, 1 Kings 14:9, specifically 2 golden calves, 1 Kings 12:28, 2 Kings 10:29, and 17:16. In other contexts, "thrust me behind your back" refers to being disobedient and rebellious, Nehemiah 9:26, and forgetting God, Ezekiel 23, verse 35. For all their sins, Jeroboam and his house never repented. He wanted the title, but not the task. Third, conquer sin and do not continue sin. 1 Kings chapter 14, verses 12 to 18. As for you, go back home. When you set foot in your city, the boy will die. All Israel will mourn for him and bury him. He is the only one belonging to Jeroboam who will be buried, because he is the only one in the house of Jeroboam in whom the Lord, the God of Israel, has found anything good. The Lord will raise up for himself a king over Israel who will cut off the family of Jeroboam. This is the day. What? Yes, even now. And the Lord will strike Israel, so that it will be like a reed swaying in the water. He will uproot Israel from this good land that he gave to their forefathers and scatter them beyond the river, because they provoked the Lord to anger by making Asherah poles. And he will give Israel up because of the sins Jeroboam has committed and has caused Israel to commit. Then Jeroboam's wife got up and left and went to Tirzah. As soon as she stepped over the threshold of the house, the boy died. They buried him, and all Israel mourned for him, as the Lord had said through his servant the prophet Ahijah. On a crowded street of one of our large cities, a young man was snatched from the path of a speeding truck, his life saved by a venerable-looking man. Still breathless from fright, the youth thanked the one who saved his life and then was lost in the crowd. 2 weeks later, in a crowded courtroom, an anxious young man stood in the prisoner's box to be sentenced for murder. "Young man, have you anything to say before the sentence of death is passed upon you?" "Why, yes, Judge," the youth responded. "You know me." A silence moved like a shock wave over the courtroom. "I'm sorry, I cannot place you." "Yes, surely you remember. 2 weeks ago, at Main and 7th Streets, you saved my life. Surely, Judge, you can do something to save me now." A silence pervaded the courtroom. "Young man, now I do remember you, but that day I was your savior. Today I am your judge." There was no disguising Jeroboam's problem. His problem was greater than the death of his boy. It was the sin of his heart. His problem was not his boy's sickness, his sin. Frankly, it is not about the child, but about the father. The Chinese have a saying to describe ineffective change: changing the soup but not the herbs, or to boil the Chinese medicine. God's disdain, denigration, and dismissal of Jeroboam was far worse than Jeroboam's disapproval, denial, and defiance of God. The king sank to new low. Dung is mentioned for the first and only time in the Old Testament, verse 10. Dogs, plural, are unclean animals. Burning, verse 10, scattering, verse 15, and stirred up or provoked, verse 15, are in the intensive form in Hebrew, translated with the word surely. There was no king as rotten and evil as Jeroboam in the eyes of God during the period of the kings, because he continued, rallied, and perpetuated sin besides sinning personally, as no one else before or after him. No one led Israel astray or down the slippery slope the same way as Jeroboam. In fact, his name was so odious that subsequent bad kings are labeled as walking in the ways of Jeroboam. 1 Kings 15:34, 16:2, 16:19, and 16:26. An astonishing 20 times the Bible uses the phrase Jeroboam caused Israel to commit in condemning Jeroboam's influence on the northern kingdom Israel, 1 Kings 14:16 and 15:30, and her subsequent kings and dynasties, and those who walked in his ways, 1 Kings phrase, or did not turn away from Jeroboam's sins, included his son Nadab, 1526, the next dynasty King Baasha, 1534, the succeeding dynasty Zimri, 1619, the subsequent dynasty of Omri, 1626, Ahab's father, and the sons of Ahab, 1 Kings 22:52, 2 Kings 3:3, and the dynasties of Jehu and his sons, 2 Kings 10:29-31, 13:2, 13:11, 14:24, and 15:9, and Menahem and his son, 2 Kings 15:18, 24, and 28. Also, the sins of Jeroboam are mentioned 12 times in the Bible. 1 Kings 15:30, 16:31, 2 Kings 3:3, 10:29, 10:31, 13:2, 13:11, 14:24, 15:9, 15:18, 1524, 1528, and 1722, as compared to ones for three other kings, 1 Kings 16:13 and 2 Kings 24:3. The phrase walked in the ways of Jeroboam in 1 Kings progressed to did not turn away from his Jeroboam sins in 2 Kings, ending with the integration of both phrases in a fitting conclusion announcing Israel's exile. For the children of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam which he did, they departed not, or did not turn from them, until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight, as he had said by all his servants the prophets. So Israel was carried away out of their own land to Assyria into this day. 2 Kings 17:22-23, King James Version. From specific kings to collective responsibility, they did not turn away. 2 Kings 17:22, 13:6, and 17:22. Last but not least is the part Jeroboam's wife played. She is the nameless, speechless, and clueless person in the account. She had no personality, passion, or plan. She did not appeal to Ahijah for help, argue for his son's sake, or ask the fundamental question, "What can I do?" The wife got up and left, verse 17. Sadly, the three urgent imperatives in the text were from Jeroboam, not his wife. Go, disguise, verse 2, take, verse 3. Finally, neither parent offered his or her life in exchange for a loved one's, a thought that crossed my mind when my wife had cancer. Though Jeroboam's flaws were many, he had something in his favor, though not of his choice or merit. His sins were not passed, transferred, or crossed to his dying child. Conclusion. Repent before it is too late. Sin cannot be disguised. It is worse than sickness because it is infectious. Are you indifferent to God? Do you stumble over others? Have you squandered God's warnings? Bible study questions. Group study. 1. List the characters in the passage. 2. Where did Ahijah live? 3. Why did Jeroboam command his wife to seek for Ahijah? Verses 2-3. 4. What did God reveal to Jeroboam as a result? What sin did Jeroboam have? Verses 7-9. What sin did Israel commit? Verses 15-16. 5. When did Jeroboam's son die? Verse 17. 6. How will Jeroboam's house end? Verses 10-13. How will Jeroboam's son end? Verses 12-13. Progression. The progression in Jeroboam's life. From Doris, the psychologist's desk. Jeroboam sent his wife in disguise to inquire the prophet Ahijah about their baby's future. In the passage, his wife did not utter a single word. She simply acted according to Jeroboam's instructions. I wonder what her wishes were and what choices she might have. What was she like as a person? Could she have pleaded for her son's life, just like some of the mothers who desperately sought Jesus out for the healing of their children? I want to encourage parents not to simply seek only to find out what will happen to the boy, 1 Kings 14:3. Instead of looking to find out what will happen to your children, plead rather to the Lord for their lives. Jeroboam's wife approached the prophet who foretold the family's future, yet she knew not to ask God for his mercy. I believe that parents need to have high expectations for their children. Research in education has shown that high expectations on students with high support yield a better education outcome. In educational psychology, there is the concept of self-fulfilling prophecy, or the Pygmalion effect. Go on the internet and do some research on this interesting concept, where a child becomes what teachers expect him or her to be. When we have certain expectations of people or events, we somehow communicate those expectations with various cues to others. People then respond to these cues and adjust their behavior, resulting in the fulfillment of the original expectation. In simple words, your expectation affects the outcome. When your expectations for your child are low, your children may not expect anything from themselves. They may not work hard to strive for excellence. They may also underestimate their potential and what they can become. Our expectations should be high and yet realistic. You want the bar to be high enough that your children need to stretch and jump high to reach it. With challenging tasks, you need to give your children adequate support for them to help them hit the target. However, do not set it so high that they cannot accomplish without excessive help from others. When they need excessive help, it may be difficult for them to take ownership of the achievements. He or she may feel that it is your project, not his or hers. If you set the expectations too high and unrealistic, and your children feel that they can never meet your standard, they may become discouraged and suffer from a low self-esteem. So the key is, 1. Set realistic, attainable expectations. 2. Let your child know your expectations and also take personal ownership of the goal, not merely to please you. 3. Provide adequate support or actual help, encouragement, recognition of success. Remember to 1. Recognize their achievement. Always notice the small steps of improvements. They are like the steps of a ladder that lead to higher levels. 2. Recognize failures as part of the process toward success. It is important to attend to their effort, their devotion, other positive behavior, etc., and not just the result. Learn from all these lessons. Lastly, bring your expectations to God. Ask for what is really important for your child. Do not let the world dictate the expectation on your children. Achievement does not only mean academic achievements, music performance, winning athletic awards, etc. Expectations of good behavior, making moral choices, serving the Lord are even superior qualities you want to expect from the Lord. The best part is that God loves your children. In the Bible passage, we noted that although Jeroboam's son was about to die, he was recognized by God to be the only one in the house of Jeroboam in whom the Lord, the God of Israel, has found anything good. Most important is that your expectations of your children are within God's good will. Group sharing. Group leader prepare a list of common expectations of parents for their children appropriate to your group, or request each parent to list 3 common expectations, collect them, and read them aloud without identifying whose expectations they are. Have some humor and fun and include some fun expectations on the list to lighten the mood. Highlight a few from the list and have a group discussion. Try to choose from different categories. Example, 1 related to achievement, 1 related to personal discipline, such as cleanliness, and 1 related to moral behavior, such as honesty, etc. Couples sharing. Couples share your expectations for your children. Make a list together. Include both short-term expectations, or appropriate to their current age and circumstances, as well as long-term expectations. 1. Do both parents' expectations match? Parents with very different expectations can be confusing to the child. Although your expectations do not need to be identical, hopefully they are in line with each other. Do your children know your expectations? 2. Are they realistic? Discuss whether they are too high or too low. 3. Do they reflect your own desires and wishes? Or is that something for which they can take ownership? 4. Are these expectations godly? Would God want or expect this for your child? 5. What kind of support do you provide to help them meet the expectations? Pray together for your children. Commit your expectations to the Lord. Ask Him for His wisdom and love.